Okay. Do the sound check. All right. Cyberpunk Internal Affairs. Can you hear me with the new microphone?
I can
Sound
hear you.
check. Does it sound okay? I'm hearing it. I don't know if anybody else is. We'll just have to proceed until there's complaints. Okay, so I am here with Lena Wolf for our third conversation on the history of ethnic Germans in the Russian Empire and Soviet Union. And for some reason, this is the second one to take place on 14th of February, which is the anniversary of GKO Order 1281 SS, mobilizing German men who were already living in Siberia and Kazakhstan into the labor army. I have in the description, the first link is to Lena's website with information about the book. And her book is, when is it supposed to be published?
I hope the end of the year, by the end of the year, this year.
End of the year? Oh, things are slower in Europe than I anticipated.
Yes, it takes a long time, especially for a graphic novel. I think it takes at least, they need to know it 8 months in advance. To send the shipment off to China. Or
China?
From China. Yes.
What's happening in China?
I think that's where most of the printing is done. Would be nice to do it in somewhere in Europe, but let's see.
Yeah. They don't have printing presses in Germany anymore?
I'm not sure, but I wonder where those things are printed.
And
shipped, because they usually
they said turn up your volume and turn down my volume. All right, so I gotta see. That's my audio. Where is my? All right, well, that's looking too complicated. I'll just speak lower. All right, so the title of the book is "May the Universe Be Your Home."
Yes, and so it's just to the title, because we're just talking about it. The title is really a not so perfect translation, not literally translation from Russian. And in Russian, it's called Mir Вашему дому, and Mir could be peace, or it could be the universe, the world. And it's usually the way that my father finishes his phone calls. So he usually says peace to your home, which is probably it's kind of what comes from living in Kazakhstan as well. So when you're in Kazakhstan, you do wish all the best to people's homes. So you just say, peace to your home. And that's how my father usually finishes his phone conversation. But I took it because I talk about belonging and not belonging in case of Russian Germans or Germans from the Russian Empire. So I translated it, gave it a slightly different meaning. Made the universe, so the universe be your home.
Instead of world, mirror.
Yeah, so instead of peace, but although peace would be very relevant now as well, of course. Peace to your home, yeah. That's it?
Yeah, I was going to say, though it can have a kind of a dark side, there's a lot of quotations from NKVD commandants about how Germans would not be going home, that their new home forever was Kazakhstan.
Yeah, Yeah. Well, I think, yeah, I think it's a very it could be a very long discussion, but I think one of the issues for Russian Germans, even I mean, I do have a issue with terminology anyway, because Russian Germans, especially now, it's highly confusing. This terminology, it's very confusing in German, especially when you live in Germany. So most of the Russian Germans who live in Germany, um, they do find difficulties with this terminology, being called Russian German or Russlanddeutsche, because that indicates that you somehow connected to now Russia, and so the Germans from Germany, they always want to know what the connection is. If you're called Russian German, you must be in a way connected to current day Russia, and so they always want to ask you for your opinion on the current affairs, because they think you're part of the Russian state. And so there's this issue with terminology. So for me, who never lived in Russia and whose parents never lived in Russia, but my ancestors came to the Russian Empire in 1760 something, and they came towards now southern Ukraine, so Mariupol, Zaporozhye, but then they moved as well. So they moved then to Rostov on Don. They went back to, then they went to Taganrog and Mariupol again and Zaporozhye. So there's this constant movement happening. But really, my parents were deported from Ukraine to Kazakhstan. And this is where they grew up and I grew up. So I guess I'm a German from Kazakhstan. And in terms of our home, I guess all of us, we feel slightly lost. Is Germany our home? Is Kazakhstan our home? One time when I was at work in London and we had some people at work, there were some people from Kazakhstan, and I went up to them and they said, "Oh, I'm from Kazakhstan as well," and they just looked me up and down. They were like, "No, you're not." So, and I know it's a small thing, but you kind of go, so where do we belong as people? Do we belong to Germany? Do we belong to Kazakhstan? Do we belong in the universe? Maybe London, where I live now.
No, there are very few people of German from Russian descent in the UK. In fact, UK I think might be the worst as far as libraries acquiring my book of any country in the world.
Is the worst what?
It might be the worst of any country's libraries acquiring my book. Most
Oh,
of those,
really? Okay.
yeah, I think out of 94 libraries I know that it's in, one, which isn't even really a library, it's a commercial service that provides the libraries, is in Great Britain. And almost all the others are either in the United States or Germany.
I would love to check where I can find your book. Maybe I can go to the British Library and actually ask for your book.
I don't, well, they may have it but it's not listed on WorldCat.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a shame. Oh, I guess that explains why anytime I introduce myself as a German from Kazakhstan or a German from Russian Empire, um, in England, literally nobody has heard of those people. And so hence also this, therefore maybe in a way what led me to do this book as well, my graphic novel. And in fact, my graphic novel starts with exactly that. It starts in London, in Hyde Park, where Lena, the main character, me, is meeting friends and starts talking to people, and they ask a question about her background, and we kind of right from the beginning we see the confusion, because nobody knows anything about any Germans that lived in Kazakhstan. People are confused why she's called Russian German if she lived in Kazakhstan, and so those issues get addressed straight away in the book. But I guess there is a whole big dark story why Germans lived in Kazakhstan. And your topic, what you're discussing today, I guess it's one of the consequences or one of the reasons why Germans lived in Kazakhstan, not just Kazakhstan.
And most of them in Kazakhstan got there in the 41 deportation, but there were some that came earlier. So there is from 1882 some voluntary migration into Central Asia, and then there's less voluntary flight. The 1895 famine in the Volga, a lot of people flee into Kazakhstan. There's more flight during the 1920-21 famine, and then of course there's the first deportations during dekulakization in 30 and 31. But over 75% of the people of German heritage in Kazakhstan are descended of 41 deportees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So definitely. So yeah, my family from both sides went through all of it, the deportations from Ukraine, from Zaporozhye to Kazakhstan, and then being sent to Trudarmia and also Gulag. So, and I had this conversation with you. I keep on asking you those questions, Otto, on the difference between Gulag and Trudarmia.
I've been asked to give a presentation on that exact subject in the last couple of days for German from Russia Heritage Society next meeting in July. So
wonderful, because that's a big deal. Yeah, that's a big confusion. It's first of all, because nobody ever heard anything about what Trudarmia or Labor Army actually means. And because people are more familiar with the term Gulag, but Trudarmia, if you ask my grandma's opinion, she said that Trudarmia was in many ways more horrific than Gulag. In fact, Gulag, because she was first in Trudarmia, then she escaped Trudarmia, but she was captured and then sent to. Was given 20 years of Gulag, Vorkuta, but she said Vorkuta was almost, was better in many ways than Trudarmia in Kazakhstan. She was in, where was she? She was in, keep on forgetting, she was in Bayaktube, in the big mining production.
Kimpersai or
Kimpersai. Yeah. And in fact, because my father was by that time 4, he was in so he grew up in Kimpersai as well, which wasn't a wonderful place for children to be. So yeah, so that's before he was sent to the orphanage in Ukraine. Yeah. For their reasons, would you like me to say why my grandma thought that Kimpersai was worse than Gulag?
Sure. I don't have a rigid itinerary, marshroute for you to follow. So go ahead.
So I guess what I do, because I'm I know the story through storytelling from my parents and grandparents, and also reading researchers, historians like you, and many others. And but what I do is I try to make history more easy, digestible for a normal reader with images, therefore the graphic novel or comic book. And so anyway, but back to the story by my grandma Josephine. So the reason why she said Kimpersai was worse than Vorkuta is because when they arrived in Kimpersai, they didn't have any proper clothing, and they were not given any clothing. That means they arrived absolutely not prepared for much harsher winters than what they knew from Zaporozhye. So Arcturians can be easily minus 40 degrees Celsius in winter with terrible winds in the steppe, and they didn't expect it. So that means so people were just in their normal shoes, and also when they were deported, we need to remember that many people didn't know where they were going. So some of them put nice clothes on, or some of them just put whatever clothes they had. If you were prepared, if you had a lot, the people that really did better, I guess, those ones that took warmer clothing with them, but it was impossible for them to know. So my grandparents said that they didn't know; they were not told where they are going, and also they thought they would come back, so they didn't, and they could only take one bag each. So there was not much room, and if you have two children, so anyway, so they didn't have appropriate clothing, and when they started working, they would be their children. They had to leave their children behind, and which was a big issue because there was absolutely nobody to look after the children, and so they would be taken. So when they were in Camp Versailles, my understanding, well, that's what she was saying, that they would be taken by car somewhere far away, and they would work sometimes for a week or 2 weeks without any breaks, and then they would come home. They would be given some food or some kind of payment. Payment was usually not enough to buy food, but the idea was that they were compensated in some way for their hard work. But then they had to go back. And
Yeah, it was the average wage for labor army was between 130 and 150 rubles a month, and they deducted between 160 and 200 rubles a month on average for food and clothing. So,
yeah,
all right, there you can see it does, the numbers don't work out.
no. So there was. So my grandma was saying that Todarmia, they were permanently starving, and there was just not enough food. They were very weak, but then you also wanted to, whatever you got given, you wanted to collect it and hide it in your pockets, and whatever you do to bring home to your children, because the children were also barely fed and there was nobody to look after them. So what they did, and I think that's one of the cruelties of it all, and sometimes I just think it's just stupidity of people or not being organized well, I guess, but they in those Trodarmia, they would leave old people and people with serious various disabilities and really old people and children. And because those people didn't earn any money because they didn't work, in Trudarmia, they didn't receive any money, and because they didn't receive any money, they couldn't get any food. And so it was the relatives that had to give them, to provide for them. But let's say if an older lady lost their daughter, the daughter died or something else, there was nobody else to look after the old lady. So there were many cases of children, small children, looking after the very old and ill, or kind of helping each other, but also children sometimes would not, especially in winter, because they didn't have clothing, or they would grow out of their clothing. They would sit on weeks on end in winter under the duvet, one blanket maybe that they had to share, and they would not do anything else. So any kind of activities and so on, if you don't have proper clothing, you cannot really do. So anyway, so that was the situation for my grandma, and because my father was there and he was just 4, she said there was a continuous worry about him not surviving and taking care of him, and then also exhausted to the point where she said was among most of those people in Trudarmia, so it was just women in this Trudarmia in Camp Versailles, where she was. And she said most of those women, they considered suicide as a much easier way, well, just a release from in Russian they say muk, from this,
Torture.
from this torture. And but I guess my grandma was saying that she would have done it, but she had a little boy to look after, so that was maybe something that stopped her. But she was talking about how the corpses, people would just fall over and they would just work and they would stay there, and then in spring they would start thawing, like melting, and you start seeing all the corpses, and you had to work around them, and horrific things. Anyway, but when she got to Gulag and received 20 years in Vorkuta, she said it was clear cut. So you got your 20 years. It was again a woman's Gulag, and her child, my father, was sent to an orphanage in Ukraine. So she said that she knew that he would at least get food at least 2 times a day. And when she arrived in Vorkuta, they gave her warm clothing, a hat, shoes, and those puffy jackets with a number. There was always a number, I think, on the jacket, on the trousers, and also on the hat. But she said, at least we got one. And of course, there were horrific things happening in Gulag. But she said we got at least one meal a day, and even if you were exhausted, but I guess it's all comparative. It's all kind of relative, and when you decide what is better, what is worse. I mean, for me, both of those things, they sound inhuman, but I guess one of those, you had more chances to survive, even if your chances were very minimal. But having warm clothing and one meal a day is helpful.
I think over a long period of time, survival rates were higher among convicts in the Gulag. They peak death rates in 42 at about 25%. But the labor army is only from the years 42 to 47, so 5 years. And that time there's about a 20% death rate. I have to look, but some of the camps, like Usalag, have extremely high death rates that were recorded. And then we have a problem with some of these camps. It doesn't look like they're doing any recording, because we're getting like 1.2% death rates. And then similar camps doing similar activities, like Usalag, have like 38% death rates.
Yeah. So exactly. So the percentage, I guess it's hard to understand the number in percentage because of the
so about half the people that are in that 60 to 70,000 figure of labor army fatalities are people that died after they were released as invalids.
Yes.
About 30,000 are recorded as dying in the camps themselves. So there is a policy to try and get the dying out of the camps before they actually die.
Is that not mean as well? I mean, all of it is horrific, but that was also a known practice, as if they knew someone was dying, maybe also to have better records for themselves, they would send them home and let them die at home.
Well, a lot of people never even made it home. There's a huge number who died between the camp and wherever they were going, sometimes within hours.
Yeah. Yeah. So unfortunately, our Russian-German history, or at least of people who grew up in the Soviet Union, is really affected terribly by that horrific history of the Soviet Union. And I mean, it linked with the Soviet Union, with the famines and Great Terror and gulags and Trudarmia, and so our common kind of identity became really this memory of these horrific times. And when I was invited to speak at Rapid City all those years ago, for me, coming to the United States and meeting...
You were invited by Ken?
Sorry?
Was Ken the guy who invited you? Ken
Yes.
Vogel? Yes.
Yes.
I just got a couple emails from him right now.
Yeah, so he was wonderful, and I guess it was quite a far way to go from London, but we still went, and what a wonderful experience for me, also because I was really curious to meet all these other, Germans from the Russian Empire that live in America, because America was our enemy state. I mean, I grew up being terrified of really evil capitalist Americans who would annihilate our wonderful world, who would destroy our world. And I mean, the only thing about Americans I knew is that they wanted to, kill little children and innocent people and so on. So anyway, because that's what we got to hear. But also, for me, it was interesting to meet other Germans from the Russian Empire that actually moved to America. And for me, I remember thinking, when my grandma used to tell me, so when I was still a child, and she used to tell me that many people from their villages in Ukraine moved to United States and Canada, and before kind of, I guess after the revolution. And I used to think, oh my God, those poor people, right? Because they moved to this terrible capitalist world, and they will be starving there, and they will be homeless, pretty much. So anyway, so that was my upbringing. From what I hear, Americans were taught in similar ways about the Soviet Union, I guess, right? So
And then you discovered that the Germans from Russia had built the entire American Midwest.
yeah, and then I discovered that also the German from Russia, when I went from the Russian Empire, when I went to Rapid City, and I met so many descendants of those people that literally came from the same villages as my grandparents and my parents. Both of my parents were born in German villages before they were deported, and but what the difference that I really liked to see, that I was astonished about, was that when they left the Russian Empire, from where, or Russia or Ukraine or Georgia, or from where they came, or Volhynia, they brought kind of good memories, and memories of food, and memories of dance and songs, and maybe there were some bad memories there, but they kind of tried to keep those positive things. But because those who stayed behind in the Soviet Union, like my family, this knowledge of food and dance and jokes and all those little things, music, it was forbidden, or church, all of those things were forbidden. So, and it was kind of replaced with the memory of horror of the Gulag and deportations. And so that became our history. So every Russian German, from the Soviet Union, when you ask them about the history, they don't really know much about the wonderful German songs, or many don't even, many of them don't speak any German anymore, or they don't, they don't know anything about kind of the old traditions or German food, but they do remember what was done to them during the deportations and so on, and gulags. And so unfortunately, we have this negative memory that I guess we have to deal with. And it was very wonderful to go to Rapid City and meet those people that left the Russian Empire, or Russia, or Ukraine, or Belarus long time ago. But they tried to keep those positive things. So they didn't have those deportations and Gulag memories with them, because they left before that. So they had this positive part of their history that we're
No, the big negative thing for most of the Russian Germans coming to the United States and Canada would have been conscription after 1874. So my great grandfather was conscripted 18 months in the Russian army, and then they mobilized him. They wanted to send him to fight in Manchuria, and he just walked out of the empire into Germany and worked on a farm to get enough money to get a ticket to Hamburg to come to North America. And
Okay.
they denied him entry to the United States initially because he was a person of bad moral character for refusing to serve in the Russian army against Japan.
Well, I guess because I mean, the whole reason why Germans came to the Russian Empire is their freedom from military service, right? And so
One of the main reasons, yes. I mean, it wasn't a good situation overall in many of the German-speaking states after the 7-Year Wars, particularly Hesse and some of the other countries that were heavily militarized. I mean, Hesse was famous in American history for providing a huge number of mercenaries to fight with the British against the American Revolution. So it was kind of conscripting people and sending them to fight for money was kind of a major industry in Hesse. So a lot of the people that went to the Volga in 1764 were trying to avoid that.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, exactly. So I guess, one of the advantages of moving to the Russian Empire, among many other things, but it was the freedom from military service. And I think people did feel betrayed in the 1890s then, I think, when they were they had
1874 is when
they had to serve
they applied conscription to the Germans.
Yeah, so people did feel betrayed, I guess, because of that, because they were proud. I mean, by that time it was 100 years of Germans not serving in the army, so or German settlers not serving in the army. I think it was still very strong, and at least I'm not sure, but that was one of the strong things from what I knew from my grandma. But maybe that's slightly different. But I mean, she always talked about not wanting to be involved with the wars, and but that's a completely different story, I guess. So I have a whole section in my graphic book about her, the way she views the wars, and us as Germans, and or us as Germans from the Russian Empire, and how we came to the Russian Empire to escape exactly that. And anyway, so yeah.
Definitely both in the 7-Year War under Catherine II and the Napoleonic Wars under Alexander I, with the settlement of the Black Sea region, it was a huge push factor of trying to get out of the consequences for what happened to the German-speaking states in Central Europe, because geographically, what becomes Germany is not in a good position if you have a Europe-continent war between France on one side, as well as England off the coast, and then Poland and Russia on the eastern side.
Yeah. I don't know. I do have a part on the migration to, in my book, migration to North and South America. I don't know if that's of any interest for anyone to see. But I just wanted to show you this one poster that might be interesting for people to see. I need to do it. It shows like one of the. I'm just trying to do the present. Is that okay if I show?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm just gonna share my screen, and hopefully it works. There you go.
Inshallah.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know if you can see it. So it's this. Oh, did it work?
Hasn't yet.
So I don't know if you can.
I need to add it. Okay, now I can see it.
Yeah. So this is the poster that I grew up with, and this is one of those perfect posters.
2 children.
That I grew up with. So you have 2 parts to this poster. So I'll just maybe make it bigger. So on the top, you have those happy children, rosy cheeks and chubby.
Stalin loved children.
Yeah, so
Beria loved children too much.
maybe. But this is a poster. In the top part, you can see those are Russian children, Soviet children. So they are nice and fat and well fed. And then here it says two types of childhood. And then if we go below, so maybe you cannot see it fully. Let me just make it bigger.
I see. Два детства.
Yeah, and then below, can you see now the lower part of it?
There's another. I'm having trouble reading because it's tiny.
That's okay. So in
I
this
see
lower
Stranach.
part, so in this lower part, we see a child who's
Oh yes, I
homeless
see.
and a child that
Yes.
is starving.
Follow Golodnik. They're half hungry, half starved.
Yeah. So and it says in capitalist countries, speak America, because they are the worst capitalist country we knew of. So capitalist countries, those little children go hungry and they are homeless, and I do have translation here as well. Two types of childhood. In capitalist countries, millions of children are homeless and half starving. So I just wanted to show you that. I'm sorry, it keeps on going back and forward. I'm sorry, I cannot navigate it really well. It's so really big. But I wanted to show you just as an idea what we grew up with, right? So you have on one hand this perfect, happy Soviet children, and then we have the American children here below. So I have that in my book as well.
Okay, now on the other page, they're opposite. You had like little post-it notes. That's all one said famine.
Sorry.
What's on the page to the right of the? Oops, what happened there?
Just a second, it's just loading. Oh, so this is. Can you see it? Yep.
I see something. Okay, so it says famines.
So this is my next chapter. It's called
Holodomor, Stalin's Terror. Okay, yeah. I see that.
So it's usually, this is how I start my chapter. So this is what it looks like. So I can show you. So we have this. Here on this page, this is where Grandma tells Lena. So this is Grandma and Lena. And Grandma tells her, I was born during World War I. And then she tells her about the Bolshevik Revolution and the Civil War.
Now, you started in black and white, and then it comes to color?
Yeah, so we are just working on the color now. We're starting to color the book now. But certain parts, like posters and certain, we have a little bit of color here and there, but this book will get colored fully. But here we talk about... Here, this is when Grandma tells me about the villagers moving to South America, North America. So this is you guys, like your ancestors in America. And then, but Grandma said, they wanted to stay. And then Lena says, but Grandma, why would they want to leave? Everyone knows that America is bad. The capitalist system lets their own children starve. And then Grandma says, well, many children in Russia went hungry too. And I was one of them. And this is when we then go to the next chapter, when we talk about famine and Holodomor. So maybe that's again too small for you to see. I'm not sure, but we start.
Well, I get the magnifying glass out.
Sorry.
It's okay.
We start with the first famine, and this is Grandma as a young child. And
this is the 21, 22 famine?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And then saying the Bolsheviks came and took away our grain, our animals, and our food. We were left with nothing. And every day I would count the minutes until my parents brought home some food, but usually they came empty-handed and we would go to bed hungry. And then she talks about the next famine. This is the second famine, 32, 33. And again, a soldier or whoever came and confiscated everything, and then picked up my grandmother's father and also younger brother. So they were just not picking up food; they were picking up people to arrest them as well. So and
Right. So because this is still
because they were
during the decolonization goes until
exactly. So
all the
I'm
way to
not
1940.
Yeah, so if you can read this, it says, I don't know if you can see it, but it says the Bolsheviks declared us kulaks, well-off farmers, and arrested our father, and they sent him to Siberia. And then the soldiers came and confiscated our house and told us to leave. So, and that's when she says, oh gosh, sorry, the technology is not doing well. So she says we heard that there was a German village in Ukraine that took people like them, so they walked for 3 weeks. I think I looked at the distance; it was always like 500 kilometers
That's
from where they.
quite a bit of ways to go on foot.
Sorry.
That's a very long way to go on foot.
Yeah, and so as they walked, there's so many corpses, and people were just too tired and exhausted to bury them. And sorry, that's come on. I'm trying to navigate this technology. And then in 1937, they released her father. But of course, the Great Terror was just starting. And so the very next year, they came and arrested the father again. So it was just no escape. You were constantly arrested as a male. And so they arrested him. And there was nothing you could do. And this is me with my grandmother just listening to her stories and realizing that, there's nothing that people could do. This unfairness or this evil system was just doing all those things. So that's, So my book is 187 pages. So there's enough.
Wow, that's big for a comic book.
Yeah, and that's me with Lenin, my favorite person in the world back then. That's a photo of me. Can you see that?
I see you with the statue, yes.
Yeah, with the statue of Lenin. So that.
And that's in October?
October, yeah.
October.
Yep. Yeah.
So I haven't been to that part of Kazakhstan. I've only been in the area around Almaty.
Oh, wow. I would love to go to that area.
Almaty is wonderful. You know, they have the old Soviet Winter Olympics training ground at Medea, which is right outside the city. And it's so high there that they get snow in the middle of the summer. So it'll be hot, like really hot, because it's Central Asia, in the city of Almaty itself. And you can just drive to the training grounds for the Winter Olympics, and it's cold and snowing.
Yeah. Almaty. I was hoping to go there this year, but I think this book is just taking. We're not gonna make it this year, so hopefully I can make it next year and go and visit Almaty. I think Almaty is about 5,000 kilometers from Aktobe, so it's really the opposite side. So
yeah, it's close to Bishkek though, so you can just drive across the border. There's a checkpoint at the border. So once you get past that, you're basically in Bishkek. Bishkek's almost on the border.
Yeah, I heard you can get a cheap taxi from Bishkek to Kazakhstan to Almaty.
Yeah, you can do it. I haven't done it in a couple of years, but it used to be you could do for about $50.
Okay, yeah. Well, I guess we're sidetracking, but I would love to visit those places. And there is this. As much as I find the Soviet Union, the whole system difficult, and the harshness of people, I always kind of ask myself, how could people have done that to each other? Because, I mean, to imprison millions, because it's not just Russian Germans who were deported. I put a list together. There were 20 different ethnic groups that were deported, including Koreans and Estonians and Latvians and so on, of course, as you know. But
Once anybody can be an enemy, everybody becomes an enemy.
yeah, but I do wonder, what is it like to live? Well, I know because we lived through this, but how do we as human beings when can we become evil? Like, how does it happen? Because in order to deport millions of people, you needed even more people to guard them, to persecute them, to shoot them, to terrorize them. I mean, it was a whole state of all those people that were doing horrific things to other normal people. And those guards in the gulags or labor army, all those people, they had their families and children and were maybe even kind people at home, but they still did awful things to other people. Anyway, I mean, those, because I'm
Well, there's two ways to look at it. I mean, I asked this question when I first went to Lebanon, is, how could you spend 10 years shooting and killing and doing even more worse things to your neighbors for centuries after peace, and then all of a sudden just forget that anything happened? Because that's basically the Lebanese solution to the terror of the Civil War, we're just going to forget about what happened, right? But they didn't really have a good answer. It was like, we lived in peace, and then war broke out, so we killed our neighbors, and then the war stopped, and we stopped killing them. But I mean, I'm reminded of Primo Levi, the Italian Jewish mathematician, I guess, or physicist, who was in Auschwitz, who ended up committing suicide decades later. He said he had the saying about Auschwitz: "Here is kein Warum. Here there is no why.
Here there is no.
Here ist kein Warum."
Yeah. Weißt du was? You know what? This is so interesting. Gosh, here's kind of Warum. I have to write it down.
Levi, Levi. His first name Primo, so firstborn in Italian, but yeah.
Because this is such a good question, because I used to ask my grandma. So my grandma, anyway, I used to ask my grandma Josephine when because my grandma Josephine came to Germany after the gulags, and she demanded she would be released from the Soviet Union, because by that time she lost so much and she was not afraid of the state anymore. So she used to go and every single year and put in applications to leave the country, and they were not allowed, right? So it took her, I think, 22 years or something like that to eventually, until they released her and let her go. And there were horrific things that they did to her, like anyway. But because she did Trudarmia, she did labor army and gulag, and her son was taken to orphanage and all those things, and her husband was arrested, and she never saw him again, and she was was not afraid of them. So she came to Germany in 1978, and she was part of 0.3% or something that was able to leave that year. To Germany, because people keep on saying, "Oh, well, if you were German, why didn't you leave the Soviet Union?" So, and I'm just saying, well, I guess what they don't understand is that you were not allowed to. You were kept against your will in the Soviet Union.
They let a little less than 70,000 out of 2 million emigrate from 1956 to 1987. So. It was a limited amount, and it had to do a lot with what current relations with Bayard were. So if they were good, more Germans were allowed out as kind of a part of the bilateral relations. If the relations got worse as they did in the 80s under Kohl, then fewer were let out.
And So because we only came with perestroika, so we went to Germany in 1990, where majority of people went. But my grandma went to Germany in 78.
Okay, that would have been under Schmidt, and that would have been at the height of the Glasnost. So in '87, Gorbachev said anybody who has a country that will receive them can leave. So basically meant all the Germans could leave, as well as Jews and some other diaspora groups. But prior to that, you're right. While they're one of the few groups that anybody's allowed to leave, it's still quite limited when you look at the actual emigration numbers.
Yeah. But I don't know if Koreans, I think Koreans left as well during perestroika, but not as many as
They started now leaving. You start to see now a lot of Koreans coming into South Korea from Uzbekistan.
Okay, yeah.
But this is recent because of changes in policy in South Korea.
I see. Yeah, I grew up with a lot, so there were a lot of. Well, I mean, growing up in Aktubi was like a colorful experience because we had all those deported children, I guess, deported people, Koreans and Tatars and Ukrainians and Russians also. I mean, some of them were
a true prison house of nations.
Yeah, it was very colorful, and I guess this is one of the things I liked about Kazakhstan. Uzbek, there were Uzbeks and everyone mixed together, and I don't know, it was like United Nations, and but we're all there. I think what united us is that we made Kazakhstan our home, even if we are kind of forcefully resettled there. But what I want to say to you quote why it's so great is because when we eventually moved to Germany in 1990, and so I used to go and see my grandma Josephine in Offenbach, and I used to, because she would tell me, so her world was really, I guess I have to say, she was traumatized by both of those experiences, and so that whenever we talked about her life, it was almost like the only thing she could talk about was Trudarmia and Gulag. It's almost like there was this vacuum, right? Or like this time that she got stuck in, and she barely talked about anything after or before. Like you really had to ask her questions, and anyway, but her memories were, which is maybe understandably, of course, Gulag, Vorkuta, and Kempersai. But I used to say, and then she would describe like horrific. I remember once she was telling me about the guards in Vorkuta and how they were doing terrible things and really horrific things. Like if you didn't get your quota, they might just tie you to a tree and leave you to be eaten by mosquitoes alive, and or they would put honey on you to make you, to be eaten by mosquitoes and so on. But and I would always ask myself, my grandma would say, "Warum? Yeah, why did they do that? I mean, it was already a terrible environment to be in Vorkuta, in Gulag. So why were the guards so awful on top of it? Not everyone, of course, but there were many horrific cases." And she would say, and my grandma would say, da gibt's kein Warum, right? So there is no why.
Yes, so there is no why.
And she would just say, it was just like that. That's it. And she would say, asking why is just useless. Because asking why indicates that it could have been a different alternative kind of route or something. But she said, in this case, there's no point of asking why. It just was. That's it. And you just accepted it. So that's really interesting. I never heard anyone saying it again. he is
Well, Levy was quite famous, and he was very famous for that quotation. So
yeah.
I'm sure you can find it.
Yeah. But do you want to? And what was his name? I'm sorry.
Primo Levi. So he was in the labor camp at Auschwitz. He was
Okay.
from Italy. So he
Yeah.
got there late. I think would have been after 43. And he survived the war. And then he ended up, I don't remember if it was the 80s or 90s, but sometime much later he committed suicide. He had figured that humanity had learned nothing.
Mm. So on the topic of humanity, so the reason why we are holding this conversation is the order for Trudarmia in February of 42. Was it February 42? Yeah.
Yes.
And was that the order that made all that mobilized all Russian, German women as well?
No, that was in October.
So that was in October 42.
Yeah, 7th of October 42. So what happened is they couldn't get enough men from those deported from the European parts of the Soviet Union into Siberia and Kazakhstan mobilized into the labor army. Part of it is because a lot of them weren't in good enough physical shape to pass the physical, because it was done like military conscription. Part of it was they didn't have the necessary clothes and other supplies required.
Yeah.
And part of it was, particularly in Kazakhstan, the Kazakh government wanted to keep skilled agricultural laborers from the deportees in Kazakhstan on the kolkhozes because they had lost the Russians that were doing that work to conscription in the Red Army. I think it was something like at this time in between January and February, almost 3,500 exemptions were issued for skills by the Kazakh government in Alma-Ata. So they came up almost 30,000 people short of the quota for conscription in the labor army. And then they said, okay, German men who were already living in Siberia and Kazakhstan, but who were not deported, are also subject to mobilization. And a much higher percentage of those passed the physical exam because they hadn't been deported and had enough supplies. So about a little over 40,000 German men who were already living in Western Siberia and Kazakhstan were sent into a labor army detachment, mostly in the Urals.
So that means, so if we had Russian Germans who moved to Kazakhstan in the 1920s, let's say, they were also mobilized, what they call mobilized.
Yes.
But I guess the worst, so one of the worst thing for the German, this Russian German minority was really the mobilization of women and even younger kind of teenagers
well, legally the decree allowed mobilization as young as 15 for men and 16 for women.
Yeah.
But we know that in some cases there were youths as young as 13 being mobilized.
Yes. Yeah. That's correct. But of course, because I guess for me, it's also about, so we talk about the kind of, I don't even want to say, is it policies and the consequences of it, or orders and what becomes of it. And one of the things that always stuns me as someone who grew up in the Soviet Union is this lack of connection between releasing an order and then realizing what happens afterwards. And also not maybe being...
This order was issued by Stalin personally. I don't think he cared how many people died.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But they did, I mean, in the Soviet, there were people who truly believed in the goodness of the communism. And some of those people that were in leadership position or senior positions did want to make good changes, but it was impossible for them to implement those. But the consequence of this, not this one, well, but the one in, as you said, October in 42, when women and younger people were also mobilized, is of course the fact that so many of the Russian German children became homeless. So as soon as a child turned 3, they were separated from their mothers, or mothers were separated from the children. And even if there was nobody to take care of the children, mothers were sent away to labor army, which I think...
In some cases, though, the mothers or older sisters would take the children with them.
That's right.
They,
So
they thought that was better than being abandoned completely in Kazakh hole.
Yeah, I mean, there were so many among our relatives, so many people there where a 10-year-old older sister ended up looking after much younger siblings, and because the mother was taken away. So if you had someone who was 10 looking after 3-year-olds or 4-year-olds, I guess you were lucky. There was some kind of chance of survival, but still, if you were taken away for weeks on end, and you couldn't really, as we discussed before, the payments were not the best, and the mothers needed to bring some food back home. All of it was had devastating effect on the children. I think I was reading that just in Kazakhstan, there was in 1 year, I think it was 44 or 43, there were about 40,000 homeless children, German children, roaming the streets, just because there was no point of staying in the lager.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, one thing I do want to say, I was kind of stressed by the Kazakh government. Now it's kind of a propaganda, but it does have some truth. There were some Kazakhs that did take in German children, so there is kind of some internationalism there. I mean, it wasn't all Kazakhs, often there were Kazakhs in the NKVD that did horrible things as well. But there were a number of documented cases of Kazakh families taking in orphan children because of the labor.
Yes, and you said it really well, and absolutely right. And those are maybe were good cases. We do unfortunately also know of cases of German children being forcefully adopted, meaning Russian families were forced to adopt those undesirable children. And of course, the families that were forced to adopt them didn't really necessarily like the fact that they had to adopt a German child, especially if their family members were killed in the army at the front by the Nazis and so on. So there were also, I think, and also many of those German children, they were given a new name. So that was one of the practice as well. So they were given a Russian name or a different name, which meant that the parents, when they came back from Trudarmia, could not find their children. But that seemed to be, my father was given a new name as well in the orphanage. So that seemed to be, I mean, the idea was that the children would get an opportunity for proper, Russification, Sovietization, become proper Soviet citizen, and not be influenced by the evil German upbringing. And so if the mother cannot find the child, then this child will have more of a opportunity to become a proper Soviet citizen. But it's of course horrific as well, because those mothers were alive, and some of them spent years searching for their children, and some of them never found them.
So there's a huge number of men who, upon being released from the labor army in the Urals, were unable to find their original wives and children in Kazakhstan and Siberia. And so a lot of those men ended up taking Russian wives. But in some cases, the original German wife and children were still alive. They just had no idea where.
Yeah, I guess you do many things to survive, but this is on the topic of Kazakhstan, because you were saying, I guess I'm saying I'm always thankful that we ended up being in Kazakhstan and not somewhere else, because in Kazakhstan people are known for being welcoming and for being providing help. But this is this is just
Well, I don't know. I mean, there are cases of it, and the Kazakhs and Kyrgyz and other nomadic peoples like to pride themselves on hospitality. But as I said, it's certainly documented cases of them saving the lives of a number of Germans and other deported peoples. So, I mean, it's not something that just made up to make them look good. It did happen in a number of cases.
Oh no, I do believe that it truly happened. I think it's most likely that it happened. I mean, this is just from my graphic novel. How does it work like this? This is Grandma Emilia, and this is tulips. This is tulips in Kazakhstan. But she says, I'm eternally grateful for the kindness of those Kazakh people who understood that we needed help when we were deported. You saved our lives. You will always be in my prayers. So my grandma had very high opinion of people in Kazakhstan, and she did say, and they were saved. So when they were deported, because they were dropped off in the snow, just women and children, and it was purga. I don't know if you know. Purga is like a very strong snowstorm, very windy, and so it was just women and children, and the train took off. And by the morning, many of those women and children just froze to death. And they had the ones who survived, they built a type of igloos. But it was Kazakh people who came and rescued them. And so for my grandma, it was, she was very thankful to people of Kazakhstan. And me as well. That's me. Finished.
Oh, you're done? You have nothing more to say? All right.
Oh no, I'm me finishing on this story, and there's always lots to say. But yeah, no, I think I'm glad that the listeners who are listening to you will get to know a bit more about the meaning of Trud Armia and Gulag.
By book.
Yes, exactly. Yes. I heard that Hans Christian Petersen bought it for Germany for his institute.
Yeah, he did. I had a email correspondence with him. It's in most of the German specialist libraries that deal with Germans east of Germany, so not just the Rutland Deutsche, but the whole Volksdeutsche, Retrieving and Züchtiger. So almost all of those specialist libraries, including the one Peterson is associated with, have ordered it, and it's on their shelves. Germany isn't the problem as far as institutional sales, primarily because I have a German publisher. It's places like Great Britain and Canada and Australia and New Zealand that don't seem to want to buy any books.
That's interesting. Okay. But why Canada? Canada has big.
We have a few. There's a few, but Canada seemed to be very underrepresented compared to the fact that it had hundreds of thousands of particularly Black Sea Germans living in the western part.
Exactly. So I thought they would be even more interested. I know that the Nuremberg Center for Russian-German History, they got that book as well, your book.
Yeah. As I said, most of the German libraries that deal with ethnic Germans in the East have it. It's And then the largest group of sales have been to a U.S. university libraries.
Ah, okay, yeah. I'm supposed to be speaking to Vasa University, and in a few weeks' time. I don't know much about the university, but the person who organized it, she has the same name as you. She's called Paul with the last name.
Yes, Mikalia.
Yeah,
I know
exactly.
her.
Ah, okay. But you're not related.
I believe Paul was actually her first husband's name, and she just never gave it up.
Ah, okay. I see.
But I'm not related to him either.
Okay. Okay. Well, it will be. Hopefully, it will take place, and will be interesting to give a talk at the university. And I'm of course incredibly. I'm fascinated. I love the fact that young students will get to know a bit more about Russian Germans and their history, but B, also, I guess, about how to present it in a graphic novel format, like your personal story, how to do it. So that would be very interesting. Do
Yes.
do you listeners have any questions?
I don't know. It says there's 4 people watching.
Okay.
Do they have any questions?
Is there anyone from United Kingdom?
I don't know about the United Kingdom. The U.S. This is a bad time because everybody's at work except me.
Do you usually have that talk a bit later?
Usually, if I dream, it would be later. Yeah, because
I see.
Right now it is my time, Mountain. It's noon, so the East Coast would be 2 o'clock. It's still 3 hours before most people get off work.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. I'm sorry. That's probably not the best.
No, it's okay. It's because I get Mondays and Tuesdays off, and I work 5 a.m. to 1 p.m. anyways.
I'm glad that you have a job that is stable. I met a Russian German artist who's a wonderful painter in Germany. She does wonderful paintings, and she works at DM. DM is this in Germany a very everyone knows that it's what do you call it in America? Drugstore.
Like like an apteca.
Like a what?
An apteca. A drugstore.
No, not like Apteka. It's like it sells beauty products and health store. Like it's massive, but it has like everything from supplements to beauty to shampoo to everything. It's a very famous.
Yeah, we call it a drugstore. It'd be like CVS here.
Okay. But one of the things she explained to me, she said that having those stable times, working there, allows her to go home and focus on her art and the painting. And she has been, she's wonderful. I cannot wait to be able to release my book, earn some money, and buy one of her paintings. So having a Russian German painter.
You think you're going to sell enough copies to be able to buy a painting?
Well, maybe she will give me a discount.
Okay.
I hope I will be able to sell this book because this story is. I hope the people in Germany will buy it, not just Russian Germans, but Germans as well, because there's such a lack of knowledge in Germany about who we are. And that's really frustrating because 30 years on, after our massive immigration, most Germans still don't have a clue who we are. And it's really annoying and frustrating. But it's really not their fault. It's just that Russian Germans, I guess, maybe we haven't been talking about it because we learned to be silent about all of those things, to be quiet and just get on with life. Don't stand up. Don't be too loud. So maybe it's in a way, it's because we continue the same lifestyle as what we learned in the Soviet Union. Just be quiet and move on. And so, and that explains why people now are still in Germany. Every time I introduce myself as German from Kazakhstan or German from the Russian Empire or Russia, people are just look at me like I'm an alien. They have no idea what it means. And and it makes it worse, of course, if they call you just Russian, and then ask you about my position, or they ask me why I invaded Ukraine, things like that. But that's what people do to simplify, right? And there I stand, and I have to explain my position to people, and I just think, well, I'm not sure where to start. So.
See, you wouldn't have that problem in the Dakotas or Nebraska. Everybody would know what a German from Russia is.
Yeah, but I guess that's the difference. You guys talk about it. I don't know. You people are informed about it. In Germany, a normal German person has no idea. So yeah, for them it's just one and the same. And so that has to change. So I hope all those people, the Russian Germans in Germany, the Germans in Germany, in the UK, it doesn't seem to be much interest in this type of history. But I hope people in America and Canada would be interested in reading this book. And I don't know if I mentioned to you, but we have a girl in my running club, and she is a German. Well, her grandparents are Germans from Odessa, but she is from Zambia. So, they are, and so her grandparents came from Odessa. They went to Hamburg, and then from Hamburg they realized there's no way they can get land in Hamburg as what they were doing in Odessa. So that's just was it just when the war broke, or before the Second World War? I think it was maybe right after the Great Terror, and they went to Zambia, and they lived in this German commune in Zambia. So she went to a German school, and so apparently there were quite a few Germans. So Germans from Germany and Germans from like her ancestors from Ukraine went to Zambia. So it's interesting because she introduces herself as African, and but she looks.
Well, there was a semi-successful plan by Bismarck to settle Russian Germans in what is now Tanzania. And a number got settled there, and then they moved to South Africa after Tanzania got independence in '63. So they kind of merged with the Afrikaners, but there were actual Volga German settlements in German East Africa for a while.
Really? And so those people must still exist. So there must be quite a few of Volga Germans.
They've pretty much intermarried with, as I said, the Afrikaners that were also settled in German East Africa and went to South Africa. So the only place in Africa where you still have strong German identity is in Namibia. Where, something like 8% of the population speak German as their first language. Mostly people of European descent, but there's also some mixed race people.
That's I find it fascinating because she asked me to translate a few letters from the letters that they received, I think, from an aunt or uncle from Odessa, and the last letters that they received, and they kind of kept them. I think they forgot about them, but they found those letters, and this woman or this person never made it. It was a woman, I think. This woman never made it out of Odessa. So, but the letters, so they asked me to translate just to say what the letter was saying. And the letter was in Russian with some German. It was quite interesting. So it had some German words in Russian. So I did translate it together with my mom. And it was interesting to see. So I think it was from 38 or 1938 or 39. And she was basically just asking, saying, we want to come to Germany. So what is it that, and we are selling, or what is it that we can buy or bring to Germany that we can then exchange for money? So I think that's maybe I guess there were difficulties taking out money, or I'm not sure what you did with your land in 39, 38.
So the ruble was not exchangeable.
Yeah, so
You couldn't go to a forex and buy marks with the ruble 38.
no, I see. And I assume because there were Großgrundbesitzer, Großgrundbesitzer, what would that be? Big landowners, and I assume all their land was taken away during decolonization and Great Terrors. So I guess like they lost all of that, but they were still hoping to somehow exchange goods for money when they come to Germany. But she never made it, so they don't know what happened to her. But I guess we all know what happened to her, more or less. Anyways, so that's
speculate.
Yeah.
Well, yes. But there are Germans from Russia everywhere. But I mean, the big settlements outside the Russian Empire, of course, now Germany, because of the mass return in the 90s, and then Argentina and Brazil have very large populations. The U.S. Midwest, particularly Kansas, Nebraska, the Dakotas, Colorado.
Yeah.
And then the western parts of Canada.
Why specifically western part?
Because of that was where they had agricultural land for them to settle and farm.
I see. So most of the Russian Germans went back they wanted to do farming as they did in Russia.
Most of them did. In the United States, we had what's called the Homestead Act. And most of the Germans coming from the Russian Empire in the 19th century and early 20th century were able to take advantage of that and get free land in the Midwest. And that's why they're in that region rather than in cities in the East.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. Ken told me a few stories about homesteading, and that when the Russian Germans came, and coming from kind of this really closely knit communities in Ukraine or Russia, where they all lived together and with churches and so on, and then coming to America, where they would be somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and the next family would be, I don't know, that many, 10 kilometers at least, or 20 kilometers away, if not 100 kilometers away. So that sounded like that must have been quite a shock to come from this like really close community to then having relatives that are or just the next family that's very far.
Yeah, but they reestablished. I mean, Hayes basically established the Volk German community in Kansas. Places like Vishik in North Dakota basically established as Black Sea German community. So, I mean, if you've ever been to, well, I guess you haven't, but if you go to Lincoln, Nebraska, there's two areas called the bottoms because they flood with the river. So I think the north bottom and the south bottom. But those areas were all at one time Volga German because the railroad that goes through there to export the grain, I decided that since these people were leaving Russia anyways to come and farm, that the railroad might as well get some labor too. And so they started directly negotiating to move people from Russia to the city of Lincoln to workers for the railroad. And they had these two historically impoverished areas because they flooded. That became all Volga German.
Ah, okay. So is that where, still a lot of people of that?
Yeah, that's where the AHSGR headquarters and museum is. It's in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Okay. I've never been to there. Okay. I find it so fascinating because most Russian Germans in Germany are so, I don't know, we still have to find our pride in who we are and being able to speak loud about it. So I think we're getting there. It just needs a bit more time. I just hope that we don't assimilate so much that we forget where we came
Assimilate into what? Cosmopolitanism?
No, no. I guess in Germany there's a really big demand, a big. Germany had for the longest time this assimilation policy, right? So if you come to Germany, you need to be like us. It's not like multiculturalism in America, or in Canada, what I understand. But if you come
Okay,
to
but
Germany,
these are Germans coming, so how do you
yeah,
assimilate
you come
Germans
to
to
Germany.
Germany?
Well, you come to Germany and then you need to be German. Like if you're not
But
German,
they
like
were German, they were just 18th century Germans.
exactly. Exactly, but that was not accepted as German enough, right? So they would
Well,
say,
maybe it could be more German. I think the argument could be the 18th century was more German than the 21st century, but
well, in whatever way we see it, but the Germans in Germany had real problems with Russian Germans arriving and being different to them, and so the idea was, and so what happened is they said, you need to assimilate, you need to be exactly like us, meaning you need to eat schnitzel, you need to eat the same as us, you need to sing the same songs, and you need to dress the same way, and you need to speak the same way, and God forbid you have an accent, because if you have an accent, you're not assimilated,
but
right?
there
So
are regional differences in Germany itself. I mean,
sure,
obviously,
sure, but
Biden has never gone along with being the same as the North.
sure, but a Russian German who spoke to a Bavarian or Badish or whatever for 200 years, mixed with Russian and whatever else, Kazakh or whatever else, sounds very different. First of all, that accent or this dialect probably doesn't exist in that form. And secondly, there's all these different influences of another language. What I'm saying is that in Germany, they didn't experience this multiculturalism, and I think they're starting to change now slowly, but for the longest time it was pretty much just be like us and don't have an accent. Speak Hochdeutsch, or you can speak a dialect but speak it without any kind of Slavic accent, and if you're not like us, we will not. There will be discrimination, right? You will not be accepted in the jobs, or if you're accepted in the jobs, you don't get paid as much because you are immigrant, and all those things. Or if you go to school, you cannot maybe go because you're an immigrant. You cannot go and do gymnasium because you are not a native speaker, or you're an immigrant, and immigrants should not be having a higher education.
Legally, they weren't immigrants. Legally, they were returnees, Aussiedler or
Yeah,
state Aussiedler.
exactly, and I agree with you on all of those points. But I'm just saying how it works in.
Okay,
But
but
yeah,
it does seem kind of strange because, as I said, in the West, of course, is Biden. It's very different than the North, not only in the dialect, but also, religion. And just like their symbols, you see the Bayerische Fahne and the kind of regional competition played out through sports, particularly football. And to a lesser extent, there's some of the differences in the East, in places like Saxony and Thuringia. And then there's all of the expellees from places that are no longer part of Germany, but were
yeah,
before the war, like Pomerania and Silesia, and of
yeah,
course the Sudetendeutsche are a large number in the south as well. So these people all had regional differences as well. So
yeah,
maybe there was I guess maybe after the war they decided the easiest way to deal with the millions of expellees and refugees was just kind of merge them into I don't know what you call it, a Bayard identity.
Ja, deutsche Identität, German identity, yeah, like gemein.
But there are other German identities. I mean, certainly they pointed out Thuringia and Saxony in the DDR did not
Sure,
develop the same way.
sure, but yeah, I guess we are talking about so there is, of course, there's like the different regional identities, but there's still German. The problem is that Russian German, or sometimes also the Schlesier, those like who immigrated in the 80s or 90s, are not considered fully German, right? So they're officially, like in terms of legal status, a German, but not in terms of integration or welcoming sometimes. So, I mean, there are a lot of issues, but the thing is, I guess we're still new. You know, it's been 30 years. So since the big kind of wave of immigration for Russian Germans, Schlesier, and so on. Schlesier, there was different waves as well. But so it will take time. But I guess what I'm saying is when most Russian Germans, when they finally arrived in Germany, and because they were forbidden kind of to speak German in the Soviet Union, or it was all very harsh, and you were not allowed to practice your religion fully and all those things. The ones that arrived, then they also welcomed this full assimilation. So they said, you know, from one day to another, we're not going to speak any Russian. We're not going to make any bishbarmak or pilmeni. We're only going to make strudel and schnitzel and those things. And we're going to be proper German. And so when they had children, they ended up speaking to their children just in German. You know, don't even think about whatever happened in Kazakhstan or in Russia. So this kind of led to this younger generation growing up very confused because they grew up with only German, but they know that their parents were type of immigrants, so they came from somewhere else. They have German status.
Aussiedler, not immigrant.
Yeah, Aussiedler, yeah. But they are not fully kind of German as the Germans that were born there. And yet nobody talks about their history, right? Nobody knows who they are or where they came from. It's like being an alien a little bit. And so this young generation is starting to grow up being confused because I guess for them it feels a little bit like not having a Boden unter den Füßen, not have the ground under your feet because you don't know where you came from.
Well, the Germans from Russia never had ground under their feet. That's why they're Volk auf dem Weg.
Yeah, possibly.
They're constantly, even before the forced migrations, you know, they migrated from Central Europe, and then they migrated a lot within the Russian Empire, sometimes for opportunity, but a lot of times, you know, because 1895 is the famine in the Volga, or there's no land left in the Ukraine in 1882, so they go to Kyrgyzstan. And then, of course, there's the big migrations into the U.S. and Canada and Argentina in particular, and people moving around, particularly in the U.S., a lot of them moving around. I think in Argentina, where they maintained a Volga German culture a lot better, there's been a lot less physical movement. They're still in pretty much the same areas that they settled in the 19th century.
Wow, that's so cool. That's so interesting. Yeah, so maybe my mom always says that we are like people on a Heimat. Without
people without a homeland.
Yeah, without people with no home. I mean,
the opposite of that is people with many homes, perhaps, is the better way to put it.
Yeah, maybe that's how you can put it. Well, I guess maybe that explains why you lived in Bishkek, right? And I lived in all possible places, and I don't know. So,
well, yeah, I mean, the technical term is multiply displaced diaspora.
Gosh, that's a very long description.
But, yeah. I mean, so this is why we talk about Russian German, because you now have, it's a double diaspora. There's a diaspora both of Germany, or Central Europe, since there was no Germany politically when they left, and of Russia in the broad sense of Eurasia, what becomes the Soviet Union. So you have this double double homeland.
Yeah.
Dva rodina.
Who?
Dva rodina.
Oh, really?
Yeah, two homelands. You've never heard that? They discuss that a lot with other groups, like the Koreans talk about having a homeland in the Soviet Union and a homeland in Korea.
Yeah. I know quite a few Koreans, and so most of them don't speak any Korean anymore, just like most of the Russian Germans who stayed behind in Kazakhstan. So it was anyway, very similar in terms of treatment, I guess, on many aspects.
Yeah, and I had a conference. It was obviously I couldn't make it there physically because it was in Tashkent, but it was just a couple of weeks ago on Russian Koreans, and so there were representatives mostly from Uzbekistan, but also other Central Asian states and Moscow and the U.S. and South Korea. And there's a debate. One of the debates is the term Koyo Saram, or if you want to put it, that's the Korean term, or the Rossiyskiy Korytsi, the Russian term. Is it still applicable now that the Soviet Union and Russian Empire are long gone? Now do we just have Uzbek Koreans and Kazakh Koreans? And what do you call Koreans that go from Uzbekistan to South Korea?
Exactly. So, I mean, they have exactly the same issue as us Russian Germans, right? And in the book, I'm trying to make sense of it, how to call us, and how do you call people, and what happens to people if to people or a group of people if you don't have a proper name for it. Because when I introduce myself and I say Russlanddeutsche, I mean that sounds just so wrong to me, because I have literally never lived there, neither my parents and so on, and yet people call me Russlanddeutsche, and whatever connection I have, it's more to Central Asia. And there's a big difference between growing up in Russia. There is, of course, tons of similarities. There's still difference between growing up in Russia, in Siberia or Volga somewhere.
Well, this is true. This is true even for ethnic Russians. There are cases of ethnic Russians who left Kyrgyzstan to move to Siberia and didn't like living in Siberia among Russians, and then moved back to Kyrgyzstan.
Yeah. I mean, I'm proud of Kazakhstan. I think I understand more Kazakh culture, and Russian culture is, of course, I'm familiar with it because I speak the language. I grew up with those values and so on. But I also know, for example, more about Kazakhstan because I grew up in Kazakhstan than a Russian person would know, right? So I would be familiar more with etiquette and with cultural aspects, with food and all those things than a Russian German who came from Russia, if that makes sense.
From Siberia.
So do I call myself exactly? So do I call myself then Russian German, or do I call myself German from Kazakhstan?
I think part of the problem is that all of these colonies that were established in the 18th and 19th century were separate from each other. There was no idea of this being a single group of people. And that only really comes about because of what happened in the Soviet Union, particularly after 1941, is that every single day they're being persecuted on the basis that they are, ethnic Germans that had descended from immigrants or settlers. It's descended from settlers and colonists that came from Central Europe. If they didn't have that, I think there would be less of this kind of psychological need for a single label for the whole population.
Yes, but exactly. They do say that the term German, Niemce in the Soviet Union really came after Stalin started deported them. Before that was Schwaben or Bayern or Volga Deutsche or.
Well, sometimes people would just be the village. They're from Norca.
Yeah, exactly.
They're from Frank.
Yeah, exactly. So and of course of all those, I mean, my grandma's German, sounds very different to my my friend's grandma. So he would be speaking like a Badish dialect, and then my grandma would sound more Hessisch, or so it's like you
And
have
among older people from the Midwest of German Russian descent, they'll tell you that it was a big deal if somebody who was of German from Russia heritage, who was a Lutheran family, married somebody from a Catholic family.
oh yeah.
So somebody from a Lutheran Volga German family marrying somebody from a Catholic Black Sea family.
Oh yeah, that's
all the way up until the 1960s and 1970s. That was a big deal in the U.S., not in the Soviet Union.
No, that was during my time. Still a big deal. So my older sister, had to marry had to find a German guy, and B, it had to be a Catholic. And that was insane, because it's not like you had a big choice, although Kazakhstan had the most amount of German deportees, but still,
They're mostly Lutheran.
It had to be a Catholic and it had to be German. So there was a limited source kind of supply of those men.
Yeah, because even, having more German Catholics than other places, most of the Catholic community in Kazakhstan were still mixed German, Polish, Lithuanian.
Mm-hmm. Yes. They were mixed, absolutely. It's like the church, the underground Catholic church that my grandma went to. It was full of people from like Latvia and Lithuania and Poland and Czech, and like there were all those different, people from different places that were all Catholics, so they all kind of came together. I don't know what language they spoke. I assume
usually they're in Russian, the Serbians, because that would be the second language of all those groups.
So my grandma, because she had to learn Russian, kind of started speaking Russian only after the deportation. So she always spoke with quite a big German accent. So that would have been, but it's something that I grew up with. For me, it was completely normal. That's what grandma sounds like, right? So I don't know anything different. And but it was, my grandma always struggled with Russian he and she, like on pashla and ana pashol, like those endings.
Yes.
She always was confused about those things. I thought it was hilarious. It was so funny.
I just do like Stalin and blur the ending so that you can't tell I don't know how to conjugate the nouns.
Well, that's a good solution, isn't it? Yeah. But the funny thing is that, like, I grew up with a grandma who spoke Russian with an accent, right? And for me, growing up, it was a normal thing. That's what it means. Having a German grandma, both of them German grandmas. But then I went to Germany, right? And then I arrived in Germany, and then I spoke German with an accent, and it was just one of those things. So I was just thinking, well, that's really hilarious, right? So I used to make fun of my grandma in a kind way, like of my grandma's accent. And my grandma didn't make it to Germany. One of my grandmas didn't make it to Germany. And I was kind of wondering if she was kind of laughing in her grave, going, now I can make fun of you because you're now in Germany and, you speak German with an accent. And so it's kind of like this repetition, kind of a circle that goes. So I think it's just one of those things that's part of life as well. I thought it was very funny anyway, because we had a lot of interesting cases with my grandma, like queuing for milk in Kazakhstan, and then like always her speaking with this German accent, which was not always welcomed. And but I used to find it very, very funny. I think sometimes she tried to speak wrong, like with an accent, say something wrong just on purpose to make me laugh. And anyway, but that's what happened.
No, I know how it is because I have a thick American accent. So when I'm in Kyrgyzstan speaking Russian or oftentimes here at work when I speak Spanish, it's obvious that I am El Gringo, but I don't worry about it. If they can understand me, that's fine. I don't care how obvious the accent is.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. I grew up with so many different languages in Kazakhstan. Kazakh and Uzbek and Korean. All my friends' parents spoke all those different languages. That for me, it was just quite normal that you just, if you live in Kazakhstan, your parents or your grandparents speak all those crazy, wonderful, different languages. So it was quite normal. Yeah. So.
Well, I think it's becoming more. So my family basically just Kyrgyz and Russian as languages, but they are Kyrgyz. So, but I'm told that actually even Russian is losing Central Asian speakers in the countryside, which is strange. So you get these cities where the main language is still Russian.
Yeah.
But the Russian is being forgotten in the hinterlands.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. But I guess maybe that was, I mean, I remember once going to, wait, let me see, Turkestan. So that's still in Kazakhstan, but on the border with Uzbekistan, so quite south.
Okay.
It's a city called Turkestan. And so I came from October, so I was maybe 10. My sister was a doctor, and I don't know, you probably know, but in the Soviet Union, when you finish your degree, you were sent like far away somewhere
Right.
after your degree to be a doctor. Anyway, so I went with my sister just for my school holidays. And so I came from Aktubinsk, where where the main language was Russian. So everyone speaks Russian, but of course at home you speak different languages. But even my Kazakh friends my age, they didn't speak much Kazakh anymore. So their grandparents spoke Kazakh, their parents, but they were kind of forgetting and refusing to speak Kazakh. So it was just part of it, part of this Russification, and Kazakh wasn't cool. Anyway, but everyone in Aktobe spoke Russian. And then I went to Turkestan, to the city on the border with Uzbekistan. It was like a different world. It was like everyone spoke either Kazakh or Uzbek, and they spoke Russian sometimes with terrible accent, and sometimes they didn't speak Russian at all, like older ladies in scarves and so on. It was just like a different world. It was just interesting for me. So
yeah, you went from the Soviet Union to Central Asia.
Yeah, I guess so. I was just not expecting that. I guess I wasn't expecting that because I remember I went to the market to buy, because they had this, Aktobe is quite north. We never had great fruit or vegetables. It's just too cold. But that, of course, the southern region is so full of beautiful apricots and this wonderful fruit. Anyway, so I went to the market to buy fruit. And there was one lady, one woman, older woman. I assume she was a Kazakh, maybe Uzbek, older lady.
Maybe Karakalpak.
Yeah, maybe Karakalpak. Yeah, I know. Yeah, maybe. But she was kind of in scarf, and then she had this kiftan, and then she had the trousers on, like the properly dressed. And she refused to sell me fruit, and she was just speaking in her language. She didn't speak Russian, and I didn't understand why, and so on. And then someone had to translate, and apparently I was not dressed modest enough as a girl, because I wore shorts, and she refused to sell a girl who wore shorts and not long trousers and long dress.
The failed year of the Soviet Union to eradicate Islamic values after decades of repression.
So I guess I was not dressed respectful enough for the market there. And that was, of course, I didn't know that. I was still very young, 10 years old, but it taught me something, because the next time I went, I made sure I put a long dress on, and like I looked, I don't know,
Put a hijab on, cover your hair.
You have, I had to cover my head, actually, hair, I had like a hat, sun hat. So my sister gave me a sun hat. So, and that was enough to cover your hair and have a long dress. And so I guess those things that you learn, you want to be respectful. But I guess that I was surprised that, you go from Aktubinsk, which is very, I guess now I'm thinking quite Russified, but quite international, to like the southern town in Kazakhstan, which had completely different culture, and also in terms of language, we just couldn't communicate with this lady. My Kazakh was not enough. I think I kept on going naan or bread or or whatever.
Bread.
My limited knowledge of Kazakh, and there was not
Kleb.
Yeah. So. But I just want to say there's a wonderful documentary. I don't know. It was. I think it's in a Karakalpak country. There is this museum.
Danukis in the capital. There's an art museum.
Yes.
Yeah, all the weird paintings were stored there because it was far enough away from Moscow that the censors didn't care.
But I watched this documentary and I was so impressed. I just think this is maybe, despite me criticizing the Soviet Union so much, I think.
I can't remember what that museum is called. It's world famous, though.
Yeah, I think those examples kind of show you the determination of one single person and what he was able to achieve, and hide all this art and save the art. And what's his name?
The Savitsky Museum.
Savitsky, genau.
Yeah, the Savitsky
exactly.
Museum.
Yeah.
Well, now they call it the State Museum of Arts of the Republic of Pakistan, named after Savitsky. But I think everybody just calls it the Savitsky Museum.
I cannot wait to go to that part of the country just because of the museum.
Are you familiar with Moscow?
No. Well, I've been to Moscow a few times, but
you probably don't, because I had a conference at this particular institution. That's the only reason I know it exists. But it's called the Library of Foreign Language. Library. But anyway, it basically might have been the Library of Forbidden Books. It was set up so the Soviets would. It's out of the way because they don't want people to know about it. It was set up so that Soviet researchers could have access to enemy literature to study.
Wow. Wow.
So I had a conference there dealing with Kurds, relationship between Kurds and Russia and the Soviet Union. I think it's called the Library of Foreign Literature. And it's not very big, and it's hard to find because it's out of the way, and it's not on a lot of maps and whatnot. But anyway, they moved most of the foreign literature out of the Lenin Library across from Red Square into this place after World War II to keep it isolated. But it's an interesting place because it basically is the Library of Forbidden Literature.
That's but maybe one of the things that was good, it made sure that the books were not burned or destroyed, but actually saved. So that in that regard,
we'll make sure that the wrong people didn't get to read them. With the main reason doing this.
Make sure that normal people don't get to read it. I'm part of this. I know we have been talking now for 2 hours, but we can wrap it up. I'm part of this reading club at Pushkin House here in London. And it's a wonderful, Pushkin House is a wonderful organization here, and beautiful building in Bloomsbury. But this month we are reading, I forgot, sorry, I lost it. We're reading this book, she just released, she's quite famous now, and I think she moved to Germany. She wrote this book about Tatar deportations and became quite famous in Russia. But then she had to leave Russia, and now I think she lives in Germany.
Gulnara Bekirov?
No, it's a girl's name.
Lena is only a woman's name.
Sorry, it's called Zuleika. Zuleika. And Zuleika. And it was so she first she's so this woman is Russian of Tatar descent, and so she wrote about, and so as you know about Tatar, so she wrote this book. It's called Zuleika открывает глаза. Zuleika opens the eyes, and it was a big success in Russia. And it was published, and then movies were made, and so on. But just recently, all those movies were kind of taken down, so you cannot see them anymore in Russia. And I know that she now lives in Germany because she gives a lot of talks. Because her second book was about Volga Germans, and I haven't read its more recent book, but we are reading Zuleika for the reading club at Pushkin House here in London, and I'm looking forward to it. So it is quite full on subjects of deportations and gulags and Siberia and so on. So but very similar, of course, to the story of the Soviet Germans. So yeah, and really well written.
All right. Thank you for coming on the show to talk to me about this subject. And on the discussion panel below here, the first link here, the Kazakh German, is to Lena's site. And there's information there on her forthcoming book, which will hopefully come out sooner rather than later. But I'm not sure when it will come out this year.
I hope so. I hope very soon. Yes. We just need to color it. So we just need to color, and that's it. And yeah.
So you're gonna color the whole thing?
Yes. So
I thought maybe you're gonna have like the first part in black and white, and then as you go back in the past, do it in color.
Well, there will be parts memory in black and white, but the majority of it will be. Even when I say color, it doesn't have to be like big saturated colors. It could be quite muted, but I think it would be important to give this history a color, and then the memories can be like black and white or with a wash or something. But we hopefully can start coloring soon. But my biggest issue is to raise money for it. So I'm just this is why it's a bit on hold. But I'm doing it.
I thought the German government gave you enough funding to hire a colorist.
Yeah, and then one part of it pulled out, so the money that was promised for the coloring is not available all of a sudden, very short notice, and that was very hard. And it's just what the projects are like, so you just have to deal with it, and you just need to find a different solution, and that's what I'm trying to do now. So it's a little bit on hold because of that. And I will need to try to find a solution. So I will probably speak to as many organizations in Germany again and see if there could be any support. So hopefully, but the colorist is a wonderful girl I found in Spain. So it's a very international project. So the artist is in Germany, in Essen, me here in London, the colorist is in Spain. So it's quite I like that. It's a very.
You should get a European Union grant.
Yeah, well, apart from the UK, I guess.
True.
After the Brexit, man, we still don't quite know how it happened.
I had forgotten that you had pulled out. The only time I remember that Great Britain is no longer part of the EU when somebody tries to order my book, and it's a problem because they're no longer part of the European Union, so shipping from Germany is not as easy as it used to be.
I know. This is, Otto, I think this is one of the most annoying and more difficult things, this posting now. Every single thing I send to Germany, like to my parents, to my nieces and nephews, it's basically I have to do the same stuff as if I was to send it to America now. I have to write a form telling them what's inside, and it's more expensive. It takes so much longer. It's so frustrating and so annoying, and nobody understands why we voted for it. Well, we didn't, but nobody understands how it could have happened. But Okay. So
it's actually easier to get my book in the U.S., even though it's a German publisher, than it is in Great Britain, because they have an American distributor at Columbia University Press. So
okay.
you don't pay any of the shipping or tariffs if you order it from the U.S., because you just get it from Columbia University, which is the American distributor.
Yeah.
I think also for Canada, but
Well,
Great Britain is the odd man out in that they're not in Europe and they're not part of the American distribution.
But in Germany, sorry, this is something I didn't ask. So is your book available in German?
No, it is not available in German language.
Okay. So it's available in Germany for Germans, but it's in English.
It is written in English, correct?
Yeah.
And it's published in Germany.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's good. Everyone in Germany can speak English, so it's perfect.
Well, I also was aiming to try and get initially when I wrote it, I wasn't thinking I was going to get a European publisher. I thought I was going to get an American publisher or maybe a British publisher. But Jakob Horst, who was the acquisitions editor for Ibidem Press in London, was given my contacts by David Castle, who was the acquisitions editor for Pluto Press, and he said that they wanted the book. So, ironically, one of the things I sent it to somebody I knew at a British publisher, and while they didn't publish it, he was nice enough to pass it on to a German publisher that did want to publish it.
I'm actually quite impressed that a German publisher published it, because there's such a controversy about Russian-German books. So I'm very impressed with those guys.
Is there?
Yeah.
There's 3.5 million Aussiedler and Spätaussiedler. You would think it would be a topic of some interest to academics in the Bay Area.
Yeah, but yeah. I mean, we mentioned that before, but Germany still struggles with this Russian-German Aussiedler stuff. So it's how they call it. Like especially, well, I guess in publishing normal books like novels and so on, it's a bit difficult to publish something like that in Germany, because they don't consider the topic to be interesting enough. But for researchers, no doubt, it's very interesting. So yeah. Anyway, that's maybe a topic for next discussion, because that's what I'm dealing with. I'm trying to explain to Germans.
I think there's more interest in Germany than there is in Great Britain.
Oh, well, yes. Okay, yes, that's true. That's true.
But America may actually have the most interest because of, I guess, what now, third and fourth generation, because I guess I'm the second generation, but my grandfather was not born in Europe. He was born in Canada. So I guess third generation. Mm-hmm. So Germans from Russia now in North America.
But did he still speak German?
My grandfather grew up speaking German, and he refused to speak it in his adult life, but he still understood it, because if you said something in German, he would answer you back in English perfectly, but he just wouldn't speak it as an adult.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Could he speak Russian? I don't know.
No. My great-grandfather spoke Russian, which he learned in the army. Well, my grandfather, born in Winnipeg, his first language was German and the second language English. And after that, he decided not to learn any more languages. He spent over a year in China, didn't even learn the word for rice.
Well, at some stage, we can have too much. Very interesting background in your family, though. Very interesting. Anyway, today is the Valentine's Day, so I better go and have some fun.
All right. Okay. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much.
Right.
It was very
You're welcome. All right. Thank you, everybody in the chat, and I will be logging out here. So in broadcast.